Welcome to Friday night at the Big Cat Cafe.
What was that?
Rattling chains. Rattling keys, actually.
Okay.
Welcome to Friday night at the Big Cat Cafe.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Ellen Carter.
I'm Duncan Carling Rogers, and tonight we're going to be talking about horror in literature. Among the titles that we're going to be discussing this evening are The Woman in Black, Ghost Story by Peter Straub.
We're also going to be talking about the classics, Frankenstein and Dracula.
And also that classic ghost story for Christmas, Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, filmed many, many times. Two versions that really stand out to me. Both involve the British actor Alistair Sim, who doubtless many listeners will never have heard of, but was an excellent comedy actor who played Scrooge in one adaptation of A Christmas Carol, and then later on lent his voice to a cartoon version, which I believe may have been made in the late 1960s or very early 1970s.
Well, there's also a connection with Alistair Sim's A Christmas Carol and an American TV show, The X-Files, because a scene from that version of A Christmas Carol played towards the end of the X-Files episode, The Ghosts Who Stole Christmas.
We have a line from that particular production, a couple of ghosts who explain why Christmas is a lot more ghosty than Halloween, in fact.
We used to be so good at this.
We used to have years to drive them mad. Now we get one night.
This pop psychology approach is crap. All it does is annoy them. When's the last time we actually haunted anyone?
When was the last time we had a good double murder? Not since the house was condemned.
This is embarrassing. Amateur kid stuff.
Look, if we let our reputation slip, they're going to take us off the tourist literature. Last year, no one even showed up.
No. Of all days, why did you pick Christmas? Why not Halloween?
Now, who is filled with hopelessness and futility on Halloween? Christmas comes but once a year.
You're right. These two do seem pretty miserable. We need to show them just how lonely Christmas can be.
Now, that's the old Yuletide spirit.
The BBC started a series of short films called A Ghost Story for Christmas back in the 1970s. The ghost stories for Christmas were mostly from adaptations from the novels or stories of a writer by the name of M.R. James.
Now, he had a series of his own in the 70s, didn't he? Or sorry, his adaptations were filmed independently, weren't they?
Yeah, that was certainly the case. There were a whole bunch of M.R. James ghost stories adapted at that time.
Run us through what the structure of some of these ghost stories were.
They're often based on the idea of an introspective or quiet kind of person, often an academic, who is called to a particular place or is staying at a particular place and just gets involved in whatever's going on. One story that actually predates the ghost story for Christmas concept was Whistle and I'll Come to You, which was I think a 1968 teleplay based once again, I believe, on an M.R. James story, and that was actually remade later on in the 2000s as part of the ones that they did there. One of the most outstanding of the BBC ghost stories for Christmas is The Signalman. Now, The Signalman is actually based on a short story by Charles Dickens, who wrote one of the classic ghost stories for Christmas, being A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, that's right. We mentioned A Christmas Carol early, and some of its great adaptations, and we mentioned Alistair Sim.
Yep. Well, if A Christmas Carol is somewhat optimistic in the end, in that Tiny Tim doesn't die, etc. The Signalman is not optimistic at all.
No, and I just want to go back to that for a second. There's also the redemption of Scrooge, which to me is the greater part of the story.
Indeed, it is a story of redemption, most sincerely, isn't it?
It certainly is. Tell us more about the Signalman.
The Signalman is a story in which a signalman on a particular rail line is haunted by the memory of a crash which has taken place in a tunnel near to his signal box, and he keeps seeing a ghostly figure in the mouth of the tunnel, which draws him into the tunnel and ultimately results in his death.
Well, it's interesting that many ghost stories are as a result of relived memories, because there was that really great ghost story which had a fantastic cast.
You must be talking about Ghost Story, which is a novel by Peter Straub about a group of 4 elderly men who meet on a regular basis and tell each other scary stories. The reason why they do this is it's almost preferable to tell each other made-up stories of horror than to think about the horror that they actually took part in or precipitated when they were young men. They met a bit of a party girl, all fancied her quite a lot, and then there was an accident in which they thought they'd killed her and dump her body in the back of a car rather than running the risk of ruining their futures. They decide to dispose of the body, and as the car sinks beneath the surface of a local lake, the girl, who isn't actually dead but just stunned by having banged her head, rises up in the back seat and claws at the window as the car sinks beneath the surface. Like I said, a novel by Peter Straub, who co-wrote a number of I think 2 novels with Stephen King.
Yeah, I thought that was the case.
Straub was perhaps a little more considered a writer than King, but hasn't enjoyed the commercial success to the same extent that Stephen King has. Stephen King today, for my money, Stephen King perhaps has told the same story over and over again. I was once a big fan, much less so now, and he's tended to become a little bit cruel in his writing, a little bit vicious. Some of his storytelling is marked by a basic viciousness, which doesn't really suit horror. Horror's much more subtle, really, isn't it?
Well, it should be, and I mean the best ones are because it's psychological. It's not the once you get over the Jason peering through the window or the Freddy Krueger waving his talons at you. Well, you know what you're dealing with. You can cope with it, but the story of a Ghost Story, and the Signalman. It really centers on the psychological makeup, the mental health well-being of the protagonist, and nothing is more scary than dealing with one's own conscious and one's own memory. You talk about horror, and we can't go on this Halloween without talking about 2 of the most important horror characters in literature, and that's Frankenstein and Dracula. Both, when you go back to the original source material, are actually thoughtful, introspective stories.
I don't know whether so much Dracula, which was, of course, written by Bram Stoker, I don't know whether Dracula is what you would call thoughtful and introspective. I mean, he's a fully paid up member of the Undead Club, and a fairly nasty piece of work to boot. However, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which had the title, the subtitle of A Modern Prometheus, is very, very thoughtful. And in the original novel, if you can get past how arcane the language is and how difficult it can be to the modern reader to read sentences which stretch across half a printed page, once you get past that, you realize that there's some very deep thinking in there about what it means to be human.
Well, it does. And I mean, does Frankenstein have a soul? That was the thing that tormented him.
Now I'll make the point here.
Frankenstein's monster.
The creature.
The creature.
Indeed.
The creature.
The common mistake that everyone makes. Frankenstein is not the creature. Frankenstein is the medical student who decides that he wants to play God.
That you're absolutely right.
And it's an interesting thing because he wants to play God, so in the end, the creature approaches him as if he is God.
Well, he does, and demands that as God made Adam, Eve as his mate, that Dr. Frankenstein should make him one who is as ugly as myself, as the monster says.
I'm not sure that that's actually in the novel.
It is.
It is in the novel.
It is in the novel.
Okay. Because, of course, it's very, very easy to get confused about film adaptations of books and what was in the original novel itself. I actually recall a fascinating spin on Frankenstein by a British science fiction writer by the name of Brian Aldiss, called Frankenstein Unbound, in which there are various sort of temporal ruptures which cause alternate universes and fictional universes to collide with reality, and his novel ends with all of time and space breaking down.
It's funny how particular scenes stay with you, whether they're in literature or whether they're in TV or film adaptations, because one of our favourites, and last week Suzanne Bellamy mentioned this, and it's one of my favourites as well, the 1989 TV adaptation of The Woman in Black by Susan Hill.
I understand that Susan Hill wasn't too happy with the way the screenplay panned out. It had been updated to 1925 from what was a generalized Victorian setting.
Well, the book is also told in the first person of the hero, and I'd actually seen the TV adaptation before I'd read the book, and I found that the book wasn't as compelling because it was told in the first person, and in that particular case, you know that the hero has got out of this. Whereas in the telly movie, again, there's no such luxury for the hero.
Well, that's another Friday night at the Big Cat Cafe.
We'd like to see you back next week. We've had a spirited time.
Absolutely horrifying, in fact. So it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.